We will move now to another area of conflict, serious conflict in the world. The next topic is double standards in the treatment of Palestine by the sports governing bodies. And Katarina Pijetlovic is Associate Professor at Católica Global School of Law in Lisbon, Portugal. Please.
Good evening. The world of sport has turned its back on Palestine. When Russia invaded Ukraine, it took governing bodies such as IOC, FIFA, UEFA only hours to issue their formal statements of condemnation of that act. And it took them only 4 days to suspend Russian athletes and teams from international sport. The IOC set up solidarity fund for Ukraine, while UEFA, FIFA, and many other organizations donated millions to Ukrainian sport, the right thing to do. Sport had no issue banning some countries for breach of international law. South Africa was banned from sport during the apartheid era, Yugoslavia for its role in Bosnian war, Azerbaijan for unacceptable levels of external pressures, and so on. Apparently, the mechanism for suspending countries from sport does exist. And I think that we can all agree that if we are already choosing to ban athletes for the actions of their government, then this should be done without discrimination. It should apply equally to all on the basis of objective and transparent criteria, and not on the basis of the pressure from political actors. Given the instant reaction in the Russian case, it is hard to explain in any other terms why sports federations are turning the blind eye to the war crimes committed now by the Israeli government. The very top line on this chart, which you cannot even properly see, illustrates the number of casualties on the day 4 of Russian invasion. The longest line on the bottom represents the current numbers of casualties in Gaza that have caused no reaction at all from sports federations. 14 children were killed 4 days following Russia's invasion and its suspension from sport, and that's 14 children too many. But now 14,000 Palestinian children have been killed. Gaza is being starved and bombed in clear breach of dozens of international laws. There is a mass grave, literally, on every single square mile in Gaza filled with civilians, and there has been no action and no condemnation. There is nothing that can possibly justify this. Everyone in this room knows that there is no such thing as political neutrality of sporting bodies in the sense of them being apolitical, as claimed in their statutes. The best chance the sport has to claim political neutrality is to reframe that concept, present it as practicing non-discrimination in relation to the suspension of athletes and teams for the actions of the governments. Then they can say, we are now applying our rules equally to all in a factually objective, politically neutral environment. Our rules say if there is a breach of international law by implementing apartheid, occupation, ethnic cleansing, genocide, etc., then the athletes and teams from that countries will be suspended. And only such a reframing of the concept can save that concept of political neutrality of sport. Having no internal policy coherence on this crucial matter equals not just the most serious form of discrimination, but reflects both the lack of moral and governance standards. As you can see, FIFA has all the necessary rules in place. It proclaims itself as committed to protecting international human rights and as an organization that practices non-discrimination. It says it is being neutral in the matters of politics, but that exceptions to these neutralities it may be made. Palestinians, as one of the most oppressed people in the world, never benefited from this exception. FIFA, like all other governing bodies, is obviously very much influenced by certain governments and powerful lobby groups. So they lose the claim to political neutrality, whichever way you want to define it. Killings, years-long imprisonment without charges, shooting athletes in the feet, not allowing Palestinian Cup finals to take place, this is all a commonplace. It's been happening for decades. For details of all of this info on this slide, read the letter attached to the petition that I'll be mentioning in a minute. As for the last point on the slide, there are 6 clubs from illegal settlements in the West Bank, so Palestinian territory, currently playing in Israeli leagues and hosting matches on occupied Palestinian territory in breach of UEFA and FIFA's territorial rules. So this has nothing to do with politics. But FIFA and UEFA are silent about this, even though many organizations, including 66 members of the European Parliament, have written to them about it, asking them to apply their own rules on Israel. By comparison, in 2014, when Russian Football Union tried to field clubs from occupied Crimea in its national league, UEFA promptly kicked it out. Israel destroyed the stadium that FIFA built for Palestinian people. And a couple of months ago, Israeli forces turned a football stadium in Gaza into a temporary detention camp where they paraded very young boys of about 10 years old and men all stripped in their underwear and blindfolded, while the bulldozers destroyed a stadium without any reason. IOC, FIFA, and UEFA are still silent, while Israeli government is literally killing off a member association. Even the slightest athlete activism is being stifled and athletes punished. President of UEFA, Mr. Cheferin, was asked about why is it that UEFA separates Israel from Russia when it comes to suspension, and he answered, "We are monitoring every situation, including this one, and it's hard for me to comment." What's so hard about it? Israel is now officially on trial for genocide that was considered a plausible conclusion by the International Court of Justice. Under dozens of UN resolutions, Israel runs an occupying regime for decades. Its illegal settlements on occupied Palestinian territories were considered a flagrant breach of international law, and its brutal apartheid regime has been designated as such by every major international human rights organization, including those from Israel. It was not hard for Mr. Cheferin to comment on the same day of Russia invasion. So what or who is making it now difficult to comment on Palestine, let alone take any action? And Mr. Infantino, the president of FIFA, apparently does not feel Palestinian today. These men must stop sticking their heads in the sand because they are the leaders of the global governing bodies that hold immense power and responsibilities. And they have statutory duty to impose suspension on Israel. They must apply their rules equally to all, because rules, if not applied equally, are not rules, but tools for discrimination in the hands of powerful players in the world politics. The blatant double standards are seen in the case of UEFA punishing Celtic because its fans brought flags in support of Palestine. On the other hand, support for Ukraine was not just allowed but encouraged, and Premier League had even this on display. It's not just the sport governing bodies, but organizations for protection of athletes' rights that have talked for 2 years about Russia every day have also been completely silent about Israel. So it is legitimate to ask, why is this the case? I have a pretty good guess, but I'm glad we have a Rob Keeler here, the Director General of Global Athletes, to ask him why is it that he and his organization that advocated so well for Ukrainian athletes and their rights now chose not to say a word about Palestinian athletes or what Israeli government is doing to them and their sport. There is a petition to ban Israel from international sport that I initiated and co-organized, and that can be found on Democracy in Europe movement website. This is not an easy task, precisely because of the political influence on all levels of sports. Of course, in addition to petition, we need a few national associations and governments to form a consortium, step forward in support of the same idea, like Jordan and West Asia Football Federation did today. Or even better, we need sports federations to refuse to play Israel, like a few FAs did in the case of Russia, which was then cited as one of the main reasons for Russia's suspension by FIFA. I must emphasize that the aim of this petition is not to punish athletes and clubs for the actions of their Israeli government, but it would be a necessary and unfortunate effect to stop the killings of children and destruction of every aspect of Palestinian lives, including their sport. It would put a pressure on the government. And there are many other similar initiatives. BDS movement published a statement of the 300 clubs from Palestine calling on IOC to, in their own words, ban genocidal apartheid Israel from Olympics. And last Thursday, 300 Irish athletes have signed an open letter by Irish Sport for Palestine organization, addressed to Irish Ministry for Sport, the Olympic Federation of Ireland, and all relevant sporting bodies to call for an international investigation into Israel's violation of the Olympic Charter and to suspend it. Did you know that Palestinians in the West Bank don't even have a right to collect rain on their own land for domestic and agricultural needs, because rain that falls on Palestine is the property of Israeli government? Gaza has been called an open-air prison by all human rights organizations for a reason, but now it changed its nickname into graveyard for children, and the sports organizations are still silent. Thank you.